Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the state of Wisconsin and why right now the polls are suggesting that it will be Joe Biden's best swing state in 2024. Now, to preface this, this is not an official prediction. I do not actually think that Wisconsin, of the seven main swing states, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Wisconsin, and Michigan, I do not think that of those seven key swing states, Wisconsin is going to be the best for Biden. But right now, if you look at the polls, they are saying something that is very clear, and it is that Wisconsin is, in fact, the best state for Biden. Of these seven states, it is the only one where Joe Biden leads in the 538 aggregate. He's ahead by 0.3% right now. And we've gotten some interesting polling from the state as of the past few days that seems to suggest that even though Trump is holding up well nationwide, Biden stands strong in Wisconsin. So the poll I want to talk about here is the one specifically is one that came out today from Marquette. Now, Marquette is a pretty good pollster. Again, I don't love them. I think they were decent in 2022. They weren't great in 2020, but they're definitely above average, and what they have to say is usually worth analyzing. Now, in their sample, they did a couple samples in their likely voter screen where they did not push undecided. They had Trump up by 2, but when they push undecided voters, Biden's up by 2. And then when you have just the generic poll, the registered voter screen, where you have where you don't push undecideds, you just give what you get. Trump's up by 3, but this is the most predictive number here. It's where Biden's up by 2 because you have undecideds pushed, and it's a likely voter screen, so it's simulating an actual electorate of the state, and that's a pretty good poll for Biden. And it gets interesting when you consider the other poll, the other big poll that came out concurrently today. I tweeted about this yesterday, or when I say today, I'm recording this the night before I'll release this video, but it came out on Wednesday. This video will be released on Thursday morning. But I tweeted about this. Again, if you do not follow me, go ahead and do so. My @ is on the screen. But we saw, one poll nationally that had Biden down by 4%. So a 4% popular vote victory for Trump, which would be an 8.5-point swing from 2020, where Biden won the popular vote by around 4.5 nationwide. And then in Wisconsin, we have Marquette finding him up by 2. So let's just talk about what that would mean. So in 2020, Biden won Wisconsin by 0.6%, and he won the national popular vote by 4.5. So that means Wisconsin voted just under 4% more Republican than the country. In other words, in 2020, for Trump to win Wisconsin, he would have on average needed to do about 0.6% better nationwide, which, 0.6% nationwide isn't a lot. Obviously, it's significant in the sense that it's hundreds of thousands of votes and it will impact very close states. But 0.6% is not an insurmountable margin by any means. And so that means that in 2020, Wisconsin was 4% more favorable to Trump than the country as a whole. Now, again, Marquette and the Quinnipiac national poll, those are from different companies. Obviously, Marquette and Quinnipiac are different universities. But the problem here is that you cannot justify a world in which Trump wins the popular vote by 4, but loses Wisconsin by 3 times the amount he lost it in 2020. Because again, Biden's up by 2. He's doing better than that 0.6% margin he got in 2020. So someone's wrong here. And we know this for a fact because, again, unless you genuinely think Wisconsin is going to swing left by nearly 1.5 points, while concurrently the nation as a whole swings over 8 points towards Trump, that's a hard argument to justify. If someone wants to make it to me, maybe in the comment section or even DM me on Twitter, I'd be happy to, read it over and look at it. But I think we can all agree, at least most of us can agree, that as of right now, the polls are showing a very, very different, each poll shows a different story. Is what I mean. So let's just talk about Wisconsin for a second. What do we know about Wisconsin? Mostly white, not a particularly college-educated state. It's not super below average. It's probably in the middle of the country in terms of college education, but very white, broadly not super educated the way that, whiter states in New England are. But it has kind of this blue Democratic DNA to it, because Democrats have historically been able to perform well with working-class voters and hold up with rural voters. That dynamic is eroding now as working-class voters in the driftless part of the state have swung towards Republicans in the past decade. Rural voters, too, are also kind of getting there. But Democrats have kind of held their ground because they've been getting incredible margins out of the city of Madison in the center of the state. That's where obviously the University of Wisconsin is, big college town, very progressive area. And then Democrats have also been cutting into margins in the Wow counties, which are these suburbs of Milwaukee. Historically been very Republican, among the most conservative suburbs in the country. Democrats have been gaining there. So that kind of offsets it. And long term, it could actually be beneficial for Democrats because those suburban areas are growing, whereas those working class areas and rural areas are declining in population. So that's the important part to remember. But Wisconsin is still broadly a white state. It's a state where Democrats do need to hold up with rural voters to an extent to win it. Obviously, it helps when Biden, it helps Biden to gain with the suburbs. But for him to win Wisconsin, he has to do okay with rural voters in the same way he did okay with rural voters in 2020. Wasn't a slam dunk, didn't get close to how well Obama did in 2012 or 2008, but he held up in Wisconsin's rural counties, say more so than he did in Missouri or South Dakota or Montana, right? So there's different, obviously Democrats rarely win rural areas, but there's different shades of red. And the shades of red in rural Wisconsin are a lot less deep than they are in, like I just said, Missouri or the Deep South or the Great Plains. So that's my point there. But again, when you look at what the polls, I talked about how these polls disagree with each other because on one hand, Trump's up by 4 nationally, but he's losing in Wisconsin, right? Like we talked about that. But here is, to me, the one thing the polls all seem to agree on. It's that we are seeing a realignment with race and age. So for race, we see Black and Hispanic voters moving towards Trump. And every poll, especially with Black voters, shows a 10 to 20 point swing away from Biden. So that's pretty significant. And if it's true, it will obviously be a death sentence for Democrats because they cannot afford to lose, 15% support with Black voters nationwide, 8% with Hispanic voters nationwide. That would be horrible for them. But concurrently, that Trump is doing worse with white voters than he did in 2020. And then you go over to the age breakdown, and we see a horrible amount of enthusiasm for Biden with young voters, which, Biden's always had kind of a youth problem. In 2020, he stated didn't have a great youth turnout, but it was certainly enough to beat Trump. But now the polls are saying that they're not that young voters are not enthusiastic. Some of them switched to Trump, and that Biden's numbers with them are falling drastically. But kind of make up for that, Biden is doing a lot better with seniors. So people above the age of 65, Biden does better with them than he does with younger voters. So what does that mean? Well, it means that if you believe the polls, Biden would do worse in a state like Georgia, which has a significant Black population, a significant population of college students who are young. Georgia's definitely a younger state for sure. A lot of young people moving to Atlanta, so that would hurt Biden. He'd be maybe doing better in a state like Wisconsin, where it's pretty stagnant populations. Not a lot of young people moving to Wisconsin. It's mostly white, and it's an older state. I don't know for certain the exact breakdown, but in Wisconsin the population is as a percentage, seniors make up a larger share of the population in Wisconsin than they do in Georgia, as an example. So that would explain why we're seeing shifts away from Biden in Georgia. Same thing in Arizona, same thing in North Carolina. But he's holding up in Wisconsin. Now, is a 0.3% margin anything to write home about? Absolutely not. Absolutely not, because it's still within the margin of error. And in 2020, Biden was leading by 8%, and he only won the state by half a point. So if you apply that same error, he would lose Wisconsin by 7 if the election were held right now. But again, you cannot apply polling error from elections to elections. Obviously, Tony Evers and Mandela Barnes actually outperformed their polls in 2022. So Democrats, have in 2020 and 2016, Republicans, specifically Trump, did a lot better than their polls expected them to. In 2022, we saw the opposite. Democrats actually in Wisconsin outperformed. That was a pretty shocking outcome at the time. The gravity of that cannot be understated. But regardless, just to kind of, wrap this up here, right? Like, the polls are weird because nationally they show one thing, but at state level they show another thing. We have Quinnipiac showed Biden up by 6% nationally in January. Now they think he's down by 4, so they think there's been a 10-point swing in favor of Trump between from the beginning of the year and now. And then you have other polls, right, like showing Biden is only down by 5 in Texas, but concurrently he's also down by 7 points in Michigan. He's down by 4 points in North Carolina. So we have a bunch of results coming in from these polls, and they don't line up with each other. And, that's fine. In 2022, we saw a lot of numbers that also did not, make sense. Like, I remember thinking, okay, well, how come on one hand Sherry Beasley's in a tied race in North Carolina, but then on the other hand, we have Democrats losing in Nevada and Arizona by 5 points, right? Like, so that's kind of what we're getting at here. And that is, that was a factor in 2022. But this time around, when you look at the polls, none of them make sense because the crosstabs show such huge swings in every direction from 2020. Like I just said, huge swings towards Trump with Black and Hispanic voters, huge swings towards Biden with white voters and older voters. So demographics traditionally leaning one way, trending the other way. And so what's this all to say? Look, it's a polar coaster this year. And I am not going to sit here and say, look, I know what these polls mean. I know it's going to happen. But I will say this. If you believe the polls, or even if you believe a quarter of what they're saying, then Wisconsin would be one of Biden's best states because it's the state where he'd get punished the least for swings towards Trump with Black and Hispanic voters. It's in a state where he'd benefit the most from gains with white voters and gains with older voters. So that is why Wisconsin could be Joe Biden's best state. Now, the polls are my only factor in predicting an election. Obviously, I'm sure those of you who watch my channel know that. But if you take what the polls are saying and you believe the dynamics that are expected to transpire come November, Wisconsin would be a good state for Biden. And that's why that's my argument to you is if you think Trump's going to win nationally because of what the polls say, so be it. You should think Biden will win Wisconsin. And so that's why Wisconsin right now looks like it will be potentially Biden's best swing state. So let me know what you want to see next. Let me know if you want to see more in-depth videos like this, focusing on one state. And I'll be sure to do those in these upcoming months. So again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.